Thank you. What a lovely day to be talking about creation. I'm so glad it wasn't yesterday. As Brian was saying, we are working our way through a few Psalms over the coming weeks, looking at different topics, but using the Psalm as a framework to kind of help us to think through the topic. Today we're looking at creation, as you will have worked out, and we're using Psalm 19, which we have just seen on the screen or heard. What I want this talk to be, and I hope this talk will be, is encouraging. I think we're all still going through a time, aren't we? Whether we feel we're nearly at the end of that time or at the beginning of that time or we're lost in the middle of the time. Who knows? Because the news changes every minute and we don't quite know what's going on. And it's easy to get it to drag us down. It's easy for us to feel a little bit lost in it. As I walked in this morning, one of the first things that was said to me is our numbers were low last week because people are going back onto Zoom. And I get it. We were on Zoom last week. And it's great to see so many people on Zoom this morning. But I just want to encourage us that even in spite of and in the middle of what we're going through, God is still here. Our Creator God is still with us. The one who made us, who loves us, and made everything around us is still here. What I won't be doing is focusing on all the different theories about creation, about 6 days or not 6 days, and all of that, because quite frankly, I don't think it's important today. We need to focus on him and what he does. What I want to do is to remind us to look. Simply to look. I think we can get so busy, so distracted, so beaten down by what's going on that we forget what's all around us. One of the phrases I used to use when I first started at the mission, when we were going through a particularly tough time, the trustees would ask me how I was, and I would say I'm spending too much time looking at my feet and not enough time looking at the horizon. So I wasn't looking at what was coming and what was around me, I was looking at the immediacy of my next step. I don't know about you, but that's how I felt over the last couple of years. What's coming today? What's coming tomorrow? And we forget to look. If we go back to the start of the lockdown, which is nearly 2 years ago now, when we were allowed only into our own gardens, or maybe out once a day for a walk, what did we notice? When we had to work from home or stay at home, when the roads and the skies were suddenly empty of traffic, what did we notice? I know I noticed birdsong. And I know I've mentioned it before, but it still blew my mind how many birds I could hear that were still there the day before, but all of a sudden we noticed. We noticed more nature in our gardens and in our surroundings. We suddenly had time to look and to consider. And so this morning I want to try and help take some of that noise away, some of those distractions of day-to-day life, and help us once again to look and listen. And actually to be overwhelmed. But not overwhelmed by COVID, not overwhelmed by the state of the world, but overwhelmed by the artist that made it. And to be reminded that the one who painted the night sky also painted the flecks in our eyes. And to do that, I want us to look in a number of different directions. The first thing I want us to do is look back. We've just heard Genesis 1, beautifully told, far better and more succinct than if I'd have read it. But it talks about the beginning. I'm going to read just a little bit. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And we know we can go on, as we heard, about the separation of the land and the water and the skies and the creation of everything from animals to fish in the sea, and of course to man and to woman. But it's just so easy to think that's it. That's where creation stops. Last autumn, Ondi and I, in that little gap when we were allowed to have a life for a little while, Ondi and I were fortunate enough to go to see an amazing art installation in Leicester. They had digitised a lot of paintings by Vincent van Gogh. Vincent van Gogh is my favourite artist. And they displayed them digitally around the walls, on the ceiling, on the floor of a very old Anglican church. And alongside that, there were sounds. They'd managed to get the images to move. So if you think of some of Van Gogh's paintings were wheat fields and things like that. And they'd managed to do it so that the wheat would move. And you would hear the birds fly and squawk. They turned solid historical pictures into moving pictures with sounds, and at one point a train came in and the whole room was filled with smoke, but it wasn't. And it was amazing. And it brought something even more alive than I'd ever seen before. And then we went into a different part of the church and there was a virtual reality tour. So we sat on a little stool with one of these screens on and we walked around the village while sitting very still. And it just blew my mind. My favourite Van Gogh painting, if you know it, is called The Starry Night. A very famous painting. It's a very rich blue sky and bright white and yellow, almost whirlpools swirling across the painting. And I learnt while we were there that experts believe Van Gogh painted in the colours he painted, quite unusual and vibrant and very different to other artists, because he was colourblind. And actually, they were the colours he saw. But actually, they brought them alive to us, didn't they? When I looked at the painting, and all of his paintings, I had no doubt who created it. His name's at the bottom. And we know through history and through people telling us that these are Vincent van Gogh paintings. Now, I never met Van Gogh. I never saw him paint. And I don't know anybody that did. But I know he painted that picture. I recognise the artist. But we need to look up today and be reminded who put those stars in the sky that he went on to paint. So I want to encourage you to look back at the reality of the creation of the world. Genesis 1. Read it when you have time. But I also want you to look up. Psalm 19, as we've just heard, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens God has pitched a tent for the sun. It is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. It rises at one end of the heavens and makes its circuit to another. Nothing is deprived of its warmth. That's just amazingly beautiful words. And if you saw on Christmas Day, I know on Christmas Day we were all busy celebrating Jesus' birthday and having snowball fights in church and all the rest of it. But one of the first things my father-in-law said to me when they arrived for Christmas lunch was, "Have you seen It's Been Launched?" And I thought, what on earth is he talking about? Don't worry about that, the turkey's nearly cooked. And he said, no, have you seen at last the James Webb telescope has been launched into space? And if I'm honest, I had no idea what he was talking about. I hadn't been following the James Webb telescope, which apparently had been delayed several times. But on Christmas Day, it was launched by NASA into space. It's on a very, very long journey. And the idea is that this telescope will be able to take pictures of the most distant parts of space. The most distant parts of the universe. As they said, to photograph the origins of life. Now that's a whole different conversation, isn't it? We've been fascinated by stars, by the night sky for thousands of years. We know in the Christmas story, don't we? The story of the birth of Jesus, that the wise men, the Magi, were following that promised new star to find the Messiah. So following stars isn't a new thing. It's always been part of what we've done. But we need to remember how the stars got there. When I was a small child, I went to a Coventry Church of England primary school. Each week we went across the playground into the church next door, and it was there that I first heard about Jesus and about some of the big characters that we would learn about in primary school from the Bible. And as my young faith started to develop, started to show interest in these things, my interest in these characters grew. But if I'm honest, characters like Jonah, Noah, Moses, Daniel were far more interesting than Adam and Eve. Maybe it was because I was a boy, or maybe it was because I'd missed the point. To me, they were just pretty much like on that screen, some lovey-dovey couple, hello, or whatever it was that happened, who lived in a garden together and caused a fuss by eating an apple. It didn't really interest me. But as I grew up, creation became more understandable and a little bit more important. But if I'm honest, it wasn't until I was an adult and had actually been a Christian for about 10 years that the true enormity of it all struck me. I was sat in a congregation like you guys, listening to the minister's wife speaking about creation, and in particular about the heavens and the earth. And she'd shown this beautiful picture of the earth, and we were all oohing and ahhing at the beauty of the earth. And then she showed some pictures of distant bits of the universe. And she started to talk about God creating this also. And I can honestly say I'd never, ever considered it. I'd considered the heavens as in heaven, not as the universe. So sometimes we can be aware of something, but not truly aware of something. I was aware of God creating the earth, and I knew about God creating the heavens, but I hadn't considered the stars, the planets, the comets, the asteroids. The way Brian said that it beautifully dances in harmony around the sun. The fact they don't crash into each other like a load of pool balls on a pool table. And for some reason, I'd never considered that God made all of that too. And if I'm honest, I sat there in church with my mouth open as the reality sunk in of the enormity of God's creation. We live here in a city, and therefore we struggle because of light pollution to see the night sky, the real night sky. Anybody that's ever lived away from a city, or maybe in a place where the streetlights aren't as bright, you suddenly see the reality of God's creation. I think I've said before, we went to France many years ago now, and we had to leave very early in the morning to get back to the port. And the last thing we had to do was turn the lights out, turn the electricity off, and get in the car. And I turned the power off and turned round, and it was that dark the car had disappeared. But at that moment, I looked up, and I saw something so beautiful. But when the lights were on, I couldn't see it. Sometimes the way we look at something is affected, and we don't see the true image. But I want to encourage you, especially this time of year, when we get clear, frosty nights, maybe turn the lights out in the house, look out the window, and just be amazed by God, the Creator. The next thing we need to do is look down. So we've seen that looking back helps us remember that God created everything from the beginning. Looking up helps us to see the enormity of what God does with creation. But looking down helps us to appreciate the uniqueness. Psalm 139, you have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light will become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in that secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. God is amazing. God creates the universe. God creates such massive stuff. But God created you, and you, and you, and all of us. When I was preparing this, I suddenly thought of Barbara. There she is at the back. I didn't think she was here because she's sitting at the back. But I know 5 Barbaras. I don't know how many Barbaras you know. I probably knew more over the years, but at the moment I know 5 Barbaras. There's Barbara, not you. There's Scottish Barbara. There's Little Barbara. There's Neighbour Barbara. And there's Church Barbara. They are all of similar age. They're all female. They're all white. So it would be easy to assume and to say that Barbaras are pretty much all the same. But I know that the Barbaras I know are unique and individual in the way they look, in the way they speak, their accent, their beliefs, their eye colour, all individual and unique. And we've just heard from Psalm 139 that it tells us that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, each one of us different to the next. Maybe family similarities are there, or traits. I know when Poppy was born, people said, oh, she looks like you, Darren. I don't mean the beard. And when we saw Remy for the first time, people said she looked like Ondi and Ondi's mum. So there were similarities, but they were Poppy and Remy, not photocopies of us. No one is a duplicate of the next. Just for a minute, hold out your hands, palms up, and take a look. Just take a look at your hands. I noticed this morning while the service was going on, I've got a splinter, which I'd not noticed before. But the splinter's on that hand, not on that hand. But look at your fingerprints. The only person with those fingerprints this morning is you. You are unique. Even if you're an identical twin, your fingerprints are different. You are unique. And looking down helps us to know that we are unique. That we are priceless. We cannot just be replaced by a copy. We are irreplaceable. And we have so much value. Matthew 6:26 says, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? God loves you so much, he made you unique. I joke about how many Barbaras I know, but each Barbara I know is unique. Their fingerprints are different, but they're loved by the same God. And the final direction I want you to look is forward. I hope that what we've been thought about today helps us to look forward. Look forward to a time when we're allowed out, without masks on, when we can meet properly again, when we can worship properly again. But actually, even in the middle of what we're going through, God's creation can be seen. As the spring flowers start to push through the soil towards the sun, as the lambs bounce around the fields, or the first cry of a newborn baby, we can see and hear the creativity of God. But as we come out of COVID, we need to make sure we don't just go back to where we were before. Immediately looking down. What do we look at these days? Screens. I've got my phone with me. We've got tablets. We've got televisions. We've got so many distractions from what's out there. So easy to view the world through a screen. When Andy and I were younger, before we had children, we used to love going to concerts. And it used to be the deal that you couldn't take photographs. You weren't allowed to get a camera out or phone out and take pictures or anything. And if you were, you would be oiked out and they'd be taken off you. If you ever watch a concert these days, the first thing everybody does is... So actually all you're doing is actually watching the concert from the screen of the person in front of you because you can't see. And it's so easy to live our life like this. If you search on the internet, you can see so many people falling into ponds and things like that because all they're doing is looking at their screen. Or walking into somebody else, or walking into somebody on a bike, because we become so focused on this little bit of the world and we forget everything else. Over Christmas we were watching a documentary about the Arctic, and a famous celebrity comedian was in the Arctic and he was experiencing lots of different things. And on the last day they went on a trek to find a polar bear. Now, he knew what a polar bear looked like. He'd seen a polar bear on his screen, on his computer. And then all of a sudden, this guy who lived in the Arctic went, look. And he gave him some binoculars. And this presenter, this comedian, this fully grown adult turned into a toddler when he did that. And there was a polar bear. He'd gone from knowing about a polar bear to recognising its creation. That it was real, that it was breathing, and that it was beautiful. And I want to encourage us all, as we move forward, that we look forward in 2022, put our screens down, and look up, look out, because creation's there. Just this morning, as I went into the kitchen to make a cup of tea, I turned the kitchen light on, and it shone out into our garden, and I saw a flower pot, and the first shoots of daffodils were coming up. And I'd not noticed it because it's usually too busy and too, I just want to encourage you to just keep looking forward. And just finally, one little reminder. Always look to the distance. As I said earlier, I spent too much time looking at my feet and not enough time looking at the horizon. The second half of Psalm 19, we heard say this: the law of the Lord is perfect, refreshing the soul. The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, giving joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are radiant, giving light to the eyes. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The decrees of the Lord are firm, and all of them are righteous. They are more precious than gold, much pure gold. They are sweeter than honey from the honeycomb. By them your servant is warned. In keeping them there is great reward. But who can discern their own errors? Forgive my hidden faults. Keep your servant also from willful sins. May they not rule over me. Then I was blameless, innocent of great transgression. It's interesting, the beginning of the psalm talks about the beauty of creation. And then the second half starts to tell us about almost living within it. How to live within it properly. And we're in a time, aren't we, more than ever, in all of our generations, where the world's in a bit of a mess with global warming and the rest. And I want to encourage you that actually we can all play our part. I'm sure many of us have got frustrated, haven't we, about the bins this week? It's been the only thing people have... It's even overtaken the weather in what we talked about. But the thing that upset me is we weren't recycling anymore. I got to the bins at one of the drop-off points, and there was blue bins and there was green bins, and we went, here's the recycling. And the guy went, just chuck it where you want. And I thought, actually... And I did. I just put it in a bin and walked away, and it was only when I walked away I suddenly thought, wow, I just did what I was told. And I just want to encourage you, as Christians, we still have a responsibility to take care of God's creation. So as we look back, as we look up, as we look down, as we look forward, we also need to look into the distance. What we're creating, what we're looking after is God's. We're looking after it for him, but also for those young ones we've just sent out to learn more about him. So as we enjoy creation, let's try and enjoy it for the generations to come. Amen. Now I'm going to introduce the next song, which I think is called Sit and Listen To, because there's no title for it. We're going to sit and listen to a song, possibly. I can tell you what the YouTube clip is. I don't know what the song is, but we're going to sit and listen to it together, and then I will pray.